Hello again, everybody. This is Samu speaking. Once again, we're covering the Arrancar arc of Bleach. Like I mentioned last time, we covered the first half of that massive arc, and now we're going on to the Turn Back the Pendulum and Fake Karakura Town sections. Enzo, thank you again for joining me. We've already discussed quite a bit, but let's power through the rest of this arc if you're ready to go.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Quite fitting that we paused here because this is where Kubo decides to pause. And he says, okay, we're establishing that Karakura Town is going to be the location of the final battle here. But let's pull back and let's, as this arc is called, turn back the pendulum. Let's go back over 100 years to Soul Society. It's fair to say maybe I'm more partial to a sudden flashback than you are. I will always remember when you would complain when Haikyuu would have mid-match like mid-match moments where it would cut back to explain character motives and stuff, which personally I've never had a problem with. But yeah, what do you feel about this little sub arc?
Well, I think, first of all, in my defense, I think sports manga is sort of a different animal, honestly. And
Mm.
I do think Haikyuu was addicted to too many flashback moments in the middle of matches. What I know is that this mini arc, with its unique numbering system and its placement, I think it's widely. Would it be fair to say that it's widely considered to be one of the top masterpieces of Bleach? I think generally considered to be among his best work. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
Um,
I think people consider it one of the best written, concise, and this volume I believe sold the best when it did come out.
in a certain way, I feel like it feels experimental. It feels like him saying, "I'm going to try some different things. I'm going to write in a different style than I normally write." And so I would say that this mini arc, 10 or 11 chapters, however many it is, it's not that long, really. I mean, it's a volume. So I don't think it is too long. I think it just maybe felt that way to me because of I was like, this is interesting, but I want to get back to the main story. And it may just be because, like I said, of the manner in which I was consuming, which is probably not the ideal way to consume a 253 chapter arc. But it is interesting. I think it shows you a side of the characters that we don't get to see at any other point in the story. And like seeing, we've only ever seen Urahara, for example, in one context, really, which is this outsider, this free agent, this wild card. This, we know he's powerful. We know he was a member of the Soul Society. We know that they have this kind of a wariness about him because he was and now isn't. But they also that he's extremely powerful and that he's a thorn in their side, but he's also someone that they know can be a huge help to them in the right moment. So it was interesting to see him kind of before all that shit went down. I enjoyed that, and of course, you get this aspect of seeing Aizen, um, knowing what you know now, in the early stages of his development when when he was still pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. Of course, that was happening through much of the first part of Soul Society too, but we didn't know it at that time, and now we do, and I think that makes a huge difference. Yeah, I mean, I think I think it is very good for what it is. When we did the Rurouni Kenshin episode, um, we talked about the flashback arc being roughly in the same place in the middle of the arc that it is here. And I think it was essential there, and I do think it's essential here. Now that was a shorter flashback arc, but it's also, a 100 chapter arc versus a 250 chapter arc. So I think that's understandable. So yeah, I'm not in love with it, but I feel like it does contribute in an essential way to the larger structure of Arrancar, and I also think it is interesting to see Kubo operating in a slightly different mode than we're used to seeing him. It does feel, in a sense, like a different series in largely in a good way.
Yeah, I have many thoughts. I'm glad that you touched on Aizen and Urahara. It's funny because Aizen is around for the first two sections of the Arrancar arc that we've already discussed. But it's probably fair to say that he is taking a back seat. He's letting his pawns do the work, and you
Yep.
don't really get much insight yet into other than his main goal and some creepy moments he has with Orihime. He's kind of letting his plans play out, as it were. This arc, with like when it's shifting the focus, it kind of, would you agree, it cements that Aizen and Urahara are actually pretty important to the, not even just this arc, but like the entire identity, I suppose, to Bleach. They're, to me, I kind of view them as like, they're like Littlefinger and Varys. They're these two characters that behind Ichigo, highly intelligent potential puppet masters at opposite ends of this morality spectrum going against each other. So I think this arc's like kickstarts that in a way that helps cement why they have that connection to each other.
Now that's an interesting comparison that I had not made in my head. Varys and Littlefinger. Um, Obviously, we know now which is which. Um, the thing is that in Game of Thrones, there's kind of a role reversal with Varys and Littlefinger, and kind of the one we don't the kind of their appearance and their initial role in the story kind of belies where they land in the end. Whereas I feel like, at this point, Aizen goes from being a relatively nondescript background character to big bad in like literally like, you know, the flip of a light switch, pretty much in Soul Society. So there's never any question. It's like if we knew right away Littlefinger who he ended up being, you know, I guess that would be one way to say it. Yeah, I think they do represent kind of a you know, the Soul Society is a funky sort of place.
It is indeed.
Uh, it's like, yeah, this is not a series. It is a series with clearly good and clearly evil people, but the larger poles of good and evil in terms of like the forces that control the universe are not nearly so clear cut. And so, yes, I think it is interesting in that sense, and it does sort of help to uh, define. It does sort of help to like define who the players are and what role they play in the larger story.
I think what this arc shines a light on even more than it had before, was the morality of Soul Society. Um, One section that we get is in the Maggot's Nest when Urahara becomes the 12th captain. Because he used to be in the second division with Yoruichi, his previous role was monitoring the Maggot's Nest, which is a place where the yet to be dangerous are kept. This idea as well that no one retires in Soul Society. If you aren't in the, essentially the armed forces bettering the cycle of souls, then you're put here, which is kind of a sick and twisted concept, don't you think? This idea of these people who haven't done anything yet, but they are deemed dangerous. And at the heart of this, you have Mayuri, again, my favorite character, getting even more shown about him, where it's a funny one. Because were they wrong to lock him up, knowing what he then would eventually do for Soul Society? That's a question you can ask, but
Mm,
it shows that they were willing to do something like that before he'd actually committed any crimes. And then when you just think about it, once Urahara does let him escape and bring him into the fold of his research and investigation bureau, Soul Society is happy for Mayuri to actually operate in the way that he does as long as it benefits them. So it's a weird case where they locked up this man because of what he could do, but then they thought, oh, wait, you might be of service to us. And then they kind of just let it happen, which
yeah.
I think just feeds into this kind of messed up morality this place has.
Yeah, these are not nice people. Um, there are nice people among them, more or less, but yeah, the ultimately, I think the whole Soul Society is the whole raison d'etre of Soul Society is the end justifies the means.
Mm,
So they're very much they're consequentialists. So they believe that the underwriting philosophy is whatever we need to do, we're going to do it. No sentiment. Um, you know, uh, no, fairness is irrelevant. Justice is irrelevant. It's all practical. Whatever we're the arbiters of what's right and wrong. And if you disagree with that, maybe we'll kill you, maybe we'll put you in the maggot's nest. But it's our way or the highway, pretty much.
mm.
And somebody like Urahara, he's not going to thrive in that kind of environment. That's pretty obvious that his personality is just it's anathema to that. And so it's kind of very much, I would say, the Soul Society. And it sounds funny to say when so many of these characters are kind of big, grandiose personalities, but it is kind of a nail that sticks up, gets hammered down kind of a place.
Mm.
And I do think, again, I do think that it is very much a consequentialist kind of a philosophy that governs it. Everything is the end justifies the means, and there's really no room for disagreement.
It's fascinating to think about, like we touched on before, like this series is about death ultimately. At its
Yes.
core, it's about Ichigo struggling with the death of his mother, or Hime with the death of her brother, and what happens to those when they die. And when Ichigo figures out this whole world exists, how does he fit into it? How does he deal with that? Why did Kubo create such an afterlife that is this bleak and negative and morally grey, rather than something more idealistic, I suppose? I suppose the answer to that is that it's more interesting narratively to do that. But yeah, it's interesting that he has. I feel like it's noteworthy that any burdens or problems with the real life,
You
Kubo
take them
has
with
not.
you.
You take them with you. Soul Society has them. There's poverty in Soul Society. There are royal families in Soul Society who have a better way of life.
And not only
Um,
that, though, but it's like you talked about with the Espadas in our last episode. You take them personally with you.
yeah,
It's not, it's very specific. Whatever fuck ups you had, congratulations. That we're going to strap them to your back for all of eternity. You know, it's not a particularly hopeful or optimistic take on spiritualism, is it?
no, no, yeah. So whenever I think more about Soul Society's morality, I'm like, these are the good guys, quote unquote. But like you say, there's good guys within this system of which it operates. And in the way we have it right now, Yamamoto does represent the old guard, the conservative. This is the way it is. It's funny because this is Kubo being unkubo in the way that he gives pretty concrete details about the world, the foundation, character backstory. You still have fans who complain that they feel like they don't understand Aizen enough, or they don't, we didn't see Aizen as a child. We don't understand his motives from that way. I feel like there's enough to see that Aizen just disagrees with the operation of Soul Society. It's more a question of him balancing this rejection of this world he inhabits with his own own god complex of how he feels like he could amend that. So, in the same way that Kubo is going in more granular detail than he ever would, he still manages to not reveal too much about anyone, which I
Yeah,
think is
that's
kind of.
true.
I love as well that it recontextualizes the Vizards. The Vizards came across as this cool eclectic bunch, and I think they served their purpose very early in the arc. But to then realize, oh wait, Shinji was Aizen's captain, Kensei was Tozen's captain. You see things like Shunsui with Lisa, who's in the Visors, that was his old vice captain, and she bears quite this striking resemblance to Nanao, who's Shunsui's current lieutenant. Um, and in this flashback, she's just a little girl as well. So there's just a lot of nice character connections that come together in ways that you think, wait, I didn't think that Shinji and Aizen would be such a prevalent dynamic based on the first half of this arc. But from this moment onwards, you really are like, okay, now I need to see what Shinji and Aizen are like when they do confront each other again. So I think he does a good thing in incorporating these established characters in a way that, like you say, he clearly had planned this. There is an architecture to this. These characters all
Um,
slotted in and had these
there's no
pre-existing.
question in my mind. There's no question in my mind. This was all pre-planned. I don't know how
Yeah,
anyone could
so
read it and think differently.
it's funny that, yeah. So I appreciate it in terms of what he provides for detail, fleshing out things for characters' backstories that I didn't know I needed, but once I had them, I was like, okay, this feels necessary. And then, yeah, like we touched on the morality of Soul Society and setting up Aizen to be more proactive for the rest of this arc, and also how Urahara is just important almost as Ichigo in like defeating him and being that yang to his yang. So
Mm.
yeah, I'm with that. I'm happy to close the gap on the turn back pendulum and give our ratings. Do you want to go first, Enzo? Do you have a rating on
Sure,
this one?
sure. 81. Consistent.
Oof, we really are keeping it consistent.
Yeah, I'm being honest.
Fair.
Because
I give it a 9.
part of the reason part of the reason for this, honestly, I heard
Yep.
a 9, and I'm not surprised to hear it. But part of the reason for that, honestly, is because in my mind I'm kind of thinking of the whole arc, and I wasn't really breaking it down that much. So the numbers are
Sure.
not hitting me that differently in my head, because I was thinking about kind of broadly where I was for the whole story. Although who knows, there may be some inconsistencies coming up. But yeah. So, but yes. So yeah, that's part of the reason why I think my scores have been kind of flat so far. But your score is
My score is a 97, which is a bit higher than the
woo.
previous two. And yeah, I'm on that camp of this is one of the better sections of Bleach. Not the best. I would argue the best run of Bleach is still to come, even beyond this arc. But yes, it was an unkubo yet kubo-ish way of dealing with a 12 chapter backstory of this world that he's never committed to exploring the details to this level until now. So I have much appreciation for it.
Cool beans.
And then this takes us on to the last chunk of the story. This is the fake Karakura Town arc. So, in the same way that Aizen had the plan to invade Karakura to get the Okin and get to the royal palace, Urahara and Mayuri come to save the day and are like, psych. And yeah, so they have managed to create an alternate place in Soul Society where the Aizen has been taken instead so they can deal with the fight there. And this is essentially just a big battleground for everyone, all the characters to clash with each other, leading up to the climax of this arc. I'm not going to jump to your rating yet, but one thing I wanted to mention was I know you touched on it with the Huecomundo. You did get battle fatigue. I think it's a fair assessment to say that this Fit Karakura Town section is probably the most archetypical expected battle shonen esque element of Bleach. This is about the fights. This is about characters pairing off and having cool moments with each other. And
Yep.
to my sense, is this isn't what you get most out of these sorts of series. So
No, that's
yeah, I'm curious
fair.
on your general thoughts.
Too many fights. And frankly, it's not as if the first three sections of this arc don't have a shit ton of fights too. But it's like already we're getting a shit ton of fights, and then it's like, oh wait, these go up to 11. So thank you, Nigel. It is too much for me. There's too many fights, too many characters with making snarky comments about the other person and why they suck and why I'm great, and and pulling secret moves, and then secret moves to top secret moves, and people saying, oh my god, he's so powerful, and then, oh but I can, and then doing something to be more powerful. I mean, I get it. I just am not the level of emotional investment I would have to care about this many fights over this many chapters is almost impossible to achieve. And so I didn't have it. I mean, I you would need to have me so enraptured by that point to not lose patience with it, that it would be almost impossible to ever get me there, and I wasn't. So by the time we got, it's funny because one of my favorite fights in this arc is very late in the arc, but broadly speaking, by the time we got to the later portions of it, I was just like, it's just too much. It's too much. I don't need to see, literally like dozens of badass fights one after another. I get that they're cool. I get that he's good at drawing them, but it to me, this whole thing should have been about, maybe instead of being 110 or 105 or however many chapters it was, maybe 55, 60 would have been perfect for me.
I get that. I totally get that. My reading of Fake Karakura Town is, if you're someone who's bought into Bleach, because I think this was a case where Kubo had created all these characters who had been established, some as fan favorites, and he wanted to give each of them time to shine, which caused it to be as long as it did. Basically, I view this as, if you're a Bleach fan, this arc is a dream. If you're a hater, it's a nightmare. I think having to spend this time with these characters and these fights, it just varies on how much you're bought into what's been established so far and what works for you. I think this is the time where definitely fractures showed in terms of people who were more vocal in their dislike of the series. This was around the time, I think, where I caught up to the series at this point. It was the fight with Kira quite early on, with his executioner style sword. That was the chapter that I caught up with. Yes, this was like an ongoing. I was reading this week to week. I loved it, shockingly, but at the same time that there was
Yeah.
people who loved it, there were so many people vocal of being like, "I hate this and this isn't working." So those experiences definitely run in tandem throughout this section of the arc.
Well, the other thing too is, if I had been reading it weekly as it came out, I might have felt very differently than consuming it all in a relatively short period of time, where the
I fear you would
kind
have
of the
dropped it.
same. Well, I mean, I honestly can't say. I can say though, I don't know if you remember way back when we recorded the Jinshu episode of Rurouni Kenshin. Yeah, the two branches of the Shonen Jump Battle Shonen family tree, of the characters driving battles in one branch and the battles driving characters in the other branch. And this is where I would frankly cite as evidence that Bleach is in that branch, where a lot of the times it is the battles driving the characters and not the characters driving the battles. That's just my opinion. That to me is like this arc, this sub arc of the big arc, is really where that becomes most apparent to me.
Which is funny because I feel the opposite. So I feel like Bleach is a character driven series with
It can be.
the reason why I say it specifically when it comes to the fights. I view the fights in Bleach as they're almost like conversations that two characters are having with each other. And
Yeah.
your mileage, how much you enjoy a particular fight, I think just varies on how interesting that conversation is. One critique people have is some of the fights can just be characters one upping each other. Oh, this is my move that counters yours, this is my move. Some fights lean more into choreography and styling of how it's laid out more on the page. So um, that's fair if one style is your preference more than the other. The better, especially the better fights that resonate with me, I view them as Kubo having two characters with ideologies who are able to go at it, and the fight is just kind of a vehicle to explore that with their powers, and that being an extension of their characterization, like I touched before with Zanpakuto.
All right. Can I weigh in on that?
Go for it.
I think there are. I'm not. Bear in mind, I'm just broadly generalizing and pulling numbers out of my what. But I think there's basically like 8 or 10 characters that have a well enough defined philosophy that can be true and is true in their fights. And I think if those were the only fights, I would agree with you. The problem is there are so many characters. And as I think you said yourself, there is a kind of a vibe of like, geez, I went to all this trouble of creating this character and they're really popular. I'm not going to waste them. Is that an editor's job? I'm not going to judge, but I think there's a lot of characters who simply are not well enough defined as individuals, and that don't have as enough of that personal philosophy, that defining, be it moral, ethical, or anything else, to make that an interesting process. And then it becomes two characters talking at each other. When it's the characters for whom that's true, and I know we're going to talk about favorite battles at some point, but like the Shinsui versus Coyote battle,
Sure.
I'm totally in your camp on that, because those are characters that
That's definitely one of
yeah,
those
we
fights.
know these two people. They have definite, distinct philosophies and their motivations, and even demotivated people like Stark have motivation. Their demotivation is a motivation in a sense. And there are like 4 or 5 of those pairings where that's true. But the problem is there's a lot of pairings where, at least for me, that's not true. It's just like, whoa, you're disrespecting me by not releasing your Bankai. Oh, release your Bankai. Is that the best Bankai you have? You haven't seen my Bankai. It just kind of goes on and on and on. And it just like, it's none of the individual fights are like too long. It's like, I'm ready for this fight to be over. It's just that every time one ends, it's like, let's segue into another one with Arrancar number the 11th most important Arrancar against the 9th most important Soul Reaper. It's like, okay, it's enough. It's enough.
Yeah,
Every
that's
character does not have to have their own show, their own. Like in Kenshin, even if the fights are not like super, super critical, like we criticized, frankly, and Watsuki criticized himself in Jinshu, of like, maybe these fights were not absolutely necessary, but it's like, there's 4, and then it's done. It's like, yeah, I don't know how many fights. How many fights are there in fake Karakura Town? I don't know how many, but it's a lot.
probably like 18.
50? 18? I would swear it's
I would
more.
say.
But anyway, that's again, I'm not trying to pile on, and I'm not a hater. And you talk about people who like, I hate this, I hate this. That's not me. I'm not a hater. There are series I
No,
hate.
I
I'm
know.
happy to talk about them. This is not one of them. But it did lose me with the sheer volume of these showy confrontations. There's just too many, and too many of them involve characters I just don't care that much about.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's how much you buy into the characters that um, each get their time to shine. And yeah, like I say, this is a Bleach fan's dream and a Bleach hater's nightmare to have to watch everyone get their chance taking turn to be the main character for 4 or 5 chapters at a time. I agree, not necessarily every fight has the most riveting conversation based on the pairing that we have. I'll touch on ones that I do think stick out to me. But I think the other element of Bleach, which does carry it, is the cool factor, and it's more. I think it can just appeal on a base level to someone who doesn't even need to think that much about it. If the showiness, the presentation carries it in that way, which you could view as a negative thing. But yeah, it's a combination of that, which I think is how you can buy into these fights. Um, but I suppose from my end, I'll touch on a couple in the section that did work for me. Uh, Early on, we got Hisagi, Yumichika, and Kira. They were each at a pillar. Um, these are pretty minor characters in Soul Society, though each of them are quite popular. So I think this was definitely a case where Kubo had to give them the time, or he felt like giving them the time. With Yumichika and Charlotte Coolhorn in particular, I think that's an intentional contrast of what I view as, well, one of them especially, but they're basically two gay slash queer coded characters on different levels of being flamboyant and out of themselves. Charlotte represents like being absolutely liberated, and his power representing that, whereas Yumichika, his whole thing is that he represses that he has this flowery Kido based ability because he's with the boys, he's with Kenpachi and Ikaku, and that would be a shame on him to release that. So I view that as an interesting fight on Yumichika having to accept himself, I suppose, without Kubo ever using those words. But even still, he only uses it when it's hidden from everyone else and they would not know that. So yeah, it provides insight into him, whereas Hisagi and Kira was more about their philosophy on death. Kira with his like pretty blunt executioner style of killing, and Hisagi who hates his sword. So these Zanpakuto are meant to be manifestations of their soul, their spirit, and something about himself that he dislikes, which he's using as a weapon. Yeah, I think those are pretty minor fights in the grand scheme of things, but they were interesting to me. I think Yamamoto gets a nice time to shine, which against Ion, which is more just the cool factor. Badass old man is a classic shonen trope in that way. Your fave Hachi, I think he comes in clutch and he defeats one of the strongest people in the series, and I think it's quite a creative way that gets done. Probably maybe one of my favorites of this section, and maybe one of mine of the whole series, is Tozen against Sajin and Hisagi. To me, Tozen is one of my favorite characters of the series. I think he's one of the most tragic. He's latched onto this ideology. This what Aizen represents is creating this new world of going against what Soul Society has done. For Tozen, his is because his best friend, she was killed by her fellow comrade as Shinigami, and there was no repercussions on him doing that. So his childhood friend, was just abandoned, and he felt that this is an unjust system. So he wants to do anything that he can to overthrow that. You get the sense that Aizen is very much just tagging Tozen along, and he knows that Tozen is the devout admirer of this ambition, and yeah, I think seeing Tozen succumb to that by becoming a Vizard and a Rancor himself, losing that sense of what makes him him, gaining his sight in that moment, and when he says how ugly Sajin is, yeah, that's just that really strikes for me. That resonates. There's that one panel, and Kubo draws. He's great at drawing expressions, and for this Will Fox man, when when Tozen says something on the lines of "I didn't realize how ugly you were," you can see that like mixture of "I feel so sorry for you that this is what you've become," and also like Sajin hearing something that he's heard his whole life as well from his best friend. Yeah, that's just to throw a few out there. So, any thoughts on those? And then I know you touched on the Shunsui Stark one. I don't know if you have any other
Yeah, I
ones
like
that resonate.
The Komamura versus Tosen fight is interesting to me too, because those are characters who those are among that group I talked about where we kind of know them well enough and they're established and they have mind
Hmm.
they have perspectives and identities to where they really that has traction, you know. I think Komamura is actually very interesting as a character for me. Tozen is too,
I
but
think
um, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say those are just two very underrated characters that aren't discussed much in the fandom, but I think they're very succinctly written. A great case of Kubo being like, everything that is done with them is with intention, even if, when you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, how many pages did we really get of them across the whole series? Not that much, but you understand
Mm.
everything that you need to understand.
Yeah, and again, the Hachi fight against the old king Baragon, that was a good one. But my favorite is definitely Shinsui versus Stark. I mean, I just because I find Stark to be a very sympathetic character. Is that wrong to say? Um,
No,
uh,
Stark is a
I
beloved character.
I really like him, and I like it's like um, one of the things when this arc does gain traction for me. It's when it makes you start to think, wait a minute, am I rooting for the wrong side?
Yeah.
And there are moments when that happens, and even though Shinsui is actually my favorite of all the captains too, I really like him. Um, I also feel like this is one of those moments where it's like A, am I rooting for the wrong side? And B, you kind of feel like if those two guys had like met under different circumstances, they could have been like drinking buddies. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so it's like that's the tragedy of the whole thing. really hits home to me with that arc, with that fight, I should say. And just how essentially how bleak this whole story is. This specific arc in the story, the whole story is bleak, but this specific arc in the story is very bleak, and I think it really hits home to me in that particular fight more than any of the others, because it's like,
Mm.
why does this? I mean, is this really necessary? I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like, you kind of get the feeling like neither one of these guys really wants to be doing this. They're like doing
Yeah.
it because it's like they have to, and it's like, okay, I can totally bond with that. I can totally identify with that. That totally makes sense to me. I completely get where this is happening. I get where these guys are. I understand what's going on in their heads. And it has a clarity to it that can get muddied by the sheer volume of chapters spent on those sorts of confrontations between characters who, in my opinion, just don't have that kind of clear perspective, that clear kind of identity, to the point where you really have buy-in with what's going on. With those two, you totally get both of them, and it just, so to me, I would say this in second would be the Tosen fight, but that is the most interesting one in the arc for me, including
Okay.
Ichigo's fights, by the way.
All right. Fair. Yeah, I think as well when it comes to those top three Espada, you do feel that sort of conflict when it becomes clear that they're so disposable to Aizen. Like when
Yeah,
each of them gets to breaking point, they realize like, oh, he doesn't care. Even Tozen has that moment where he has that final bit of clarity where Hisagi has to deal the final blow, and he still has a bit of his vision, and he wanted to see him while he still could, and Aizen still killed him before he had the chance to do it. So yeah, you do feel that sort of pang of this feels wrong. Even someone like Baragon, who has this resentment for Aizen, is doing it for his own like selfish reason. He wants to be the best, and he wants his final moment to try and kill Aizen. He like turns away, and it's all fleeting in the end. And even someone like Harabel, who I feel like she kind of gets done dirty. I think she has a cool design, and the concept of her is nice. Her death being sacrificed, and you see that with her Fraction, who are quite close to her. Um, and yeah, to have her eventually be sacrificed at the end without getting a chance to, I think, get real showing was a shame. Um, on the Shinsui fight in particular, I think what I love as well is you get a bit of his insight into him as a fighter. He says, the moment you start a war, both sides are evil. You have the advisors who are along with him in this battle with Stark, and they bemoan him for being like, "Why did you fight like that? Why did you come in that moment and do that and backstab him?" And Shinsui's like, "There are
it's
no rules to
kill or be
war.
killed. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to backstab.
I
I'm
see.
going to play
I
dirty."
don't hate him for that. I don't hate him for that. I think he's being honest. I think he's being honest in a way a lot of these guys are not, frankly.
Yeah,
He's like, I don't see, the thing is, he's not enjoying it. He's not proud of it. He's not bragging
yeah,
about it. He's just like, listen, I have no illusions. This is my lot. This is who I am. This is what I am. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not gonna claim credit. I'm not going to say I should be admired. But if you put me in this situation, the only thing that, again, consequentialism, the only thing that
mm.
matters is the result.
Another section I want to touch on as well while we're talking about fights. Um, I'll talk about Ichigo and Ulquiorra. Sounds like you might have a different opinion, but I think this is probably considered one of the best fights in the series by the fandom. It is also the
Oh, it's
longest
good. It's good. Yeah.
it's one of the longest uninterrupted stretches of a fight, I believe, maybe in the series. It's a long fight, but it's also quite sparse in terms of what's happening. Yeah, having Ichigo and Ulquiorra, their sort of rivalry throughout the arc culminate when Ichigo becomes full hollow, this sort of manifestation of his power becoming more than what he can control, as a result of Orihime crying out for him to help. Yeah, I think it's just one of the most raw, cool designs of like a character power up battle moment, I think, in Battle Shonen. I remember vividly reading it, and yeah, it sticks out with me. His like hollow transformation. So yeah, I think aesthetically this fight is very striking, but I also love that it is the end of Ulquiorra's character. He is one of those who gets a concrete end. There is no coming back from that, even though he is very, very beloved in the fandom and people want him to come back. Um, it's almost like the whole time with his sense of nihilism, his relationship that he had with Orihime and trying to understand how she could be this person that is so positive. Like he genuinely could not wrap his head around it. And then he confronted with Ichigo, and that whole fight, I view it as he's goading Ichigo to be like, "Prove me why I'm wrong. Like, tell me why. Why do you care so much about any of this?" Uh, and I think that does come together in their final moments when the battle does come to a conclusion, and he is overpowered, but Ichigo Ichigo doesn't want to win in a way that feels wrong. And we touched on this before, but Ichigo is like Kenshin, no? He has this potential to be a very dangerous fighter, ruthless and kill people without caring. Even though at his core he decides that's not what he wants to be. He wants to fight against that. Yeah, I think that shines through,
Yeah.
especially in this fight here.
We talked
Plus
about
the
that
fact
way back in like the very first Bleach episode we did. We talked about how his motivations, in a sense, are very similar to Kenshin's in a way. The difference being
yeah,
that Kenshin lived it, and that he's living his life for atonement for like actual sins, whereas Ichigo is trying to atone for sins he didn't commit,
hmm,
which is the fundamental difference between the two of them, which is to some extent tied down to the fact that Ichigo is basically a child. So
yeah.
it's understandable that he would have that misconception. But yes, I do think that he is like Kenshin in that way, for sure.
Since we're talking about that, that was the pairing of like Ichigo and Orihime. The other pairing that I feel strongly about and resonates with me is Gin and Rangiku. So we've not really touched on Gin much, but while Tozen definitely was a devout believer in Aizen's cause, as we come to find out, Gin was not. He was never. I'm sure you agree with me. It always felt like Gin is there, but you don't really know why. You don't know why he's doing what he's doing. Is he just doing it for the fun?
Mm,
You have that moment in Soul Society when he does part with Rangiku, and it's the only time where he doesn't have that permanent smile on his face. There's a sense of regret, like, I'm sorry I have to do this, but this is what I'm doing. So Kubo, I think, really, really it keeps you at distance from Gin for so long. There are moments where Gin tests Ichigo as well to be essentially figuring out, are you strong enough to beat Aizen?
mm,
You have this fight near the end, and when you read it the first time, you're like, oh, this is just Gin being Gin. He's teasing the main character and trying to goad him into revealing everything. But it is all him, I think, creating this backup plan of, if I can't defeat Aizen, then you're going to have to do it. So I'm going to make sure that you can. We get the reveal, just to jump closer to the end, that Gin is the only one that knew about Aizen's one flaw to his power, which is this perfect hypnosis that he uses against everyone. And the counter to that is to touch the sword. So if you're touching the sword, then the power goes away. We do see that as well with Yamamoto. And Yamamoto has this fight earlier with Wonder Weiss, who is basically created to contain his powers because Aizen actually believes he probably couldn't defeat Yamamoto if he was at full strength, so he has to do everything to prevent that. And there is one time where Aizen stabs Yamamoto and he grabs Aizen. And that's one of the only times in the arc where Aizen is properly shaken. When you realize that that's because he was actually within physical distance and he was in real danger when he fought Yamamoto for that brief moment. But yeah, Gin turns on him at an opportune chance, and yeah, he reveals everything. It was all to get revenge on what Aizen did to Rangiku, which is take her soul in order to create the Hogyokyu, which is very coded, I believe, to be like sexual assault. That's kind of the way it's presented. Um,
mm,
I get the sense that Rangiku actually didn't realize the full scope of what was happening. Yeah, I love their dynamic. They're so like characters you would never think to pair with each other. But his devotion to the point of embracing being a villain to save the one he loves, was it the correct decision? Did it actually make sense? Maybe not. It was a very selfish thing to do, but I think, uh, yeah, it was I loved the realization of his character by the end. So curious if you had any thoughts on those two.
I find it interesting that Aizen was fooled. I'm
He
not
said
sure
he
how I
wasn't,
feel
but I
about
think
that.
he was.
He was. No, in my opinion, there's no question he was. He's bullshit. He's full of shit. And which listen, even like big bads have blind spots. We know that. But basically, Gin played the ultimate long con. Really, I was, I thought that was interesting. I was not like on the floor, wow, stunned by how brilliant it was, but yeah, it was an interesting twist. It was an interesting turn. Like you said, Gin is a bit of a with that perpetual smile, and he's very much of a mystery character for almost all of his time in the series, and I almost feel like I feel kind of two minds about it because it's like, yes, it was very effective to hide that until the end, but it would have been interesting to get maybe just a little bit more insight into who he was so that when this big thing happened, we would have felt a little more emotionally impactful. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn about that, but I don't. In contrast to Watsuki, who psychoanalyzes himself to death in the pages of his own manga, both in the narrative and out, I don't get the feeling that Kubo ever regrets any choices he makes. I feel like he's very sure of himself, and he's very confident in the decisions he makes, the choices he makes with his characters. And if he felt this was the way to go, I don't get the feeling like, and I could be totally wrong, but I don't get the feeling like he agonized over it. I feel like, nope, this was always the plan. This is exactly how it's going to work. This is exactly how much of you I'm going to let see, and then that's it. And so it's a very interesting. It's an interesting. In we've done all these episodes back to back, so it is interesting to kind of compare contrast the two series in that fashion.
I think I get the sense that it feels like Kubo relished in keeping those details from the audience about Gin. Clearly, he knew what was going to happen, but having him be at arm's distance while still being enticing because he is a very popular character. He was quite high in all the polls. Yeah, I feel like he enjoyed that. That keeping it from the audience until the very, very end. Even if I do somewhat agree with you, it would have been nice to have something more to grip onto. Because I just think the concept of his character is quite strong. The other point that you made about Kubo doesn't feel like someone who has regrets. I agree with that. To give you some insight, something you said earlier, you touched on about shouldn't be in an editor's job to not make sure all these fights happen and it becomes bloated, etc. Especially for long running series, they get multiple editors throughout their run. I think in
Sure.
very early on in Bleach, he did change things based on what editors said, but he has gone on record to say there got to a point in the series where he just didn't listen to his editor and he did exactly what he wanted. And yeah, when people have asked him how much did you change based on their advice, he would be like, no, I did what I wanted. It was always what I planned. So
That's exactly how it appears to me on the page too. So that doesn't surprise me to hear that.
that's very funny. Okay, let's wrap it up then with the Ichigo and Aizen having their climactic moment at the end. Um, Ichigo has this power up, which you've mentioned to me, kind of gives you like a Go on Togashi feel, which is funny
Just a
because
little.
because they happened in the same year in Weekly Shonen Jump, so they were quite concurrent in these sorts of power ups where they lose everything that they have up until that moment. On that level, I agree that there's some similarities there. The final fight with Aizen then. So Aizen's a funny one. Aizen to me is as much Bleach as Ichigo is. He comes off as this character who he's the brains of the operation who's always so many steps ahead of everyone, and he also represents just how like cool the series can be. He's such a show off. You know, he loves nothing more than proving how cool and better he is than everyone. But there are people who have said, and I agree with it, that he's kind of a loser. Like he's so committed to his goal that he will fumble in moments where he just wants to show off, I suppose, where his god complex becomes too much. So having that time where Ichigo's power up means that, oh wait, now I can't sense his ability because it's actually above mine. He rejects that as even a possibility. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I'm the best in the world. No one can beat me. So yeah, I really enjoy this final fight. I think just as a battle shonen lover, I think it's one of my favorites of the arc, even if it is cut quite short at the end. Maybe more fascinating is the resolution where Urahara comes in and it's revealed that he kind of planted this thing within him to come out at the very end. So just as like we saw in Turn Back the Pendulum, their initial confrontation kind of mirrors what they have at the end. And yeah, even though Urahara was outcast from Soul Society, he still remains on the side of defending this system. You know, no matter how flawed Soul Society is, he will fight for it because that's what he believes he should do. Whereas Aizen wants to overthrow it. He thinks it's a bad system and he thinks it should be changed. He says as well at this point that thing. And what it feels to me is he was not even just spouting it out for dramatic effect. It seemed to me that he was really actually angry that someone like Urahara, who he views as intelligent, can't agree with him on this view of this soul society, this soul king, who at this point the viewer is not privy to what this thing is. So yeah, I'm suppose just curious on your read of this final fight and that confrontation with Aizen at the end. Ichigo even has a moment where he kind of sympathizes with Aizen, and maybe similar to what you said with Stark and Shunsui, it was like he was too strong for his own good. He had to think about these things beyond just like an ordinary person would, and Ichigo tries to find a relatability, I suppose, after defeating him.
I'm kind of the camp that the Urahara part is the more interesting than anything to do with Ichigo, really, because Urahara is the one who he knows shit, you know. Ichigo is kind of in this process of self exploration and self discovery, and um, you know, but Urahara he knows where all the bodies are buried, and I do think it's at this moment we sort of come to realize that Aizen isn't just some megalomaniac, although he is a megalomaniac, but he does have sort of this general ethos that he believes what he's doing is the right thing to do. And are we so confident at this point in the story that we can absolutely categorically say he's wrong? I don't think so.
Well,
Again,
it's classic Kubo not to explain what the Soul King is, so it's all up in the air, isn't it?
yes, although it's pretty clear from the way the whole thing is presented that there's something sinister about it. Um, and I, as someone who has not read deeper into the story or watched the anime, I have no idea. The whole gyro thing I said earlier was a joke, but you know, who knows? I mean, I don't know what or who that thing is, but I do know that we can't categorically condemn Aizen for consequentialism because the Soul Society practices it too. Their whole ethos is, as I said, is the end justifies the means. Well, Aizen believes his end is the right end, and so what he's doing is not necessarily that different than what the Soul Society is doing. You know, in Ichigo, the fight itself is perfectly fine and it's cool and it's well choreographed and it's well executed. But Ichigo is not really a foil for Aizen. You know, because he just doesn't have the experience and the context, and you know, he's to compare it to something like Hunter x Hunter, like who's the proper foil for Meruem? Well, there's only one person who's really the proper foil for Meruem, and that's Netero, because he's the one that can sort of stand opposite him and be the representative of humanity, which is effectively what is necessary. So even though Meruem, he survives, but he doesn't win, does he? And
Mm.
so, even though Gon is the main character, we all know Togashi plays fast and loose with that whole idea of who the main character is. But in the larger context, Gon is the main character, and he is a prominent presence in Chimera Ant. But that arc is not going to come down to Gon versus Meruem. That wouldn't make sense. And what happens with Netero and Meruem is far more interesting.
Yeah.
And so in this case, you do get, the Captain General getting into it, but really, it's kind of Urahara who represents he represents the opposite, the photo negative of Aizen, because Aizen recognizes him as, like, of all the people on that side, you're the one who should agree with me.
Mm.
You of all people. I don't think he ever says the phrase "you of all people," but he might as well say it. You of all people should agree with me. You should be on my side. Yeah, I do think, like you said, what we see from Aizen at that point, the anger is genuine. It's not flash. It's not show. He's genuinely angry.
Mm.
And not only is he genuinely angry, we can totally get why he's genuinely angry. I totally understand it. So for me, Ichigo, he's kind of like Gone at the end of Chimera Ant, and so he's very important, and what happens to him is very interesting. Not as interesting as what happens with Gone, but interesting still. But it's not the real climax of this arc in an existential way. He's a sort of a satellite to that, So
Mm.
that's why I find what happens with Urahara to be more interesting, and Gin too, really, because we have the whole history with Gin. Now we know that he's been playing this long con, and we know how he feels about Rangiku and all this other stuff. So that has a lot of traction. And what happens with Ichigo is more of an accessory to the main event, I would say.
Well, to go on from that mirroring of Hunter x Hunter, then Ichigo is losing his powers. That's how we end this arc. Um,
Right.
we see it drifting away from him in his last moments, where Rukia and company are with him, and they part farewell. So I have two questions for you on this. Some people think the series should have ended here. Do you think it should have, and would this have been satisfying? Would you still have had questions at this point for it to continue? And stab in the dark, curious of what you think the rest of the series has in store. If this is the new status quo, the rest of the series is shorter than Arrancar, mind you, but we're like two-thirds of the way through.
Well, low bar there. No, I don't. I never caught myself thinking it should have ended here. No, this doesn't feel conclusive to me. Um, uh, so no, I don't think so. As far as what happens in the rest of the story, uh, gosh, I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, we have Aizen. He's, what is it, 18,000 years or something that he's sentenced to prison or something. So, obviously, we have, not to keep drawing Hunter x Hunter comparisons, but the Soul King is, if you put that Chekhov's gun out there, you can't just ignore it. There is that gyro factor, as you call it, as I would call it.
Mm.
Whatever happens, it might not be immediate. I think the immediate thing, obviously, my feeling is at some point Ichigo is going to get his powers back. Having to say goodbye to Rukia the way he did, that was a nice emotional moment. But I do feel like at some point, for sure, he's going to get his powers back. And then at some point, it has to circle around to this whole Soul King question. Or so I would have thought. I mean,
Mm.
I could be totally wrong on that, but I mean, I just don't see how you can put that matzo ball out there and then and then not eat it. It's like, okay, the whole thing was fought over this whole idea with the Soul King, and then we're not gonna circle back to that. That would be an odd choice to me.
Well, going to be curious then to find out how it does play out and what you think. I will say the next arc is the shortest in the series, I believe. That
Yay!
is the one that's the one I'm actually most interested to hear your views on. That will be a fascinating discussion. But yes, for now that wraps up the well. First of all, let's give a rating for Fake Karakura Town. I'll kick off.
Bef-
Um,
Before we do that,
oh
can
sure,
I ask you a question?
go for it.
We touched on this briefly offline, but Toshiro is his massive popularity. Like I said, I saw two because they're included in the versions of the chapters that I saw. There were two character polls. So they'd happened during the course of this arc and before. So it's not because of something that happens later. But in one of them, he was a very, very close second to Ichigo, and in the second one, he was first place in the
Yeah.
character polls. So I'm curious if you could share with me. And I like Toshiro. I have no problem with Toshiro, but I'm kind of surprised at that. Why is he the most popular character as the end of the Arrancar arc? As far as the last character poll we have access to, he is the most popular character in Bleach. Why do you think that is?
For the cool factor of Bleach, I think he represents that. I think he probably, for male readers, that resonates. I think he comes across as flashy, even though when you look at it, he's actually not very competent compared to other characters. He often struggles, and I think in terms of power levels, he's actually a bit lower than some of his captain peers. Um, but I think he also just has this like attractive kind of cute boy design that is charming. So yeah, maybe he has he's one of those characters that crosses over and can appeal to everyone in the lane that which certain fans operate within the series.
Okay.
Mind you, I do not. Well, I'm fine with him now. I've grown up to be okay with him, but there was a part of me that resented how popular he was and how Kubo would insert him in situations where I would be like, oh, I wish he used a different character, but he's obviously going to focus on Toshiro because people love Toshiro. So yeah, that was me
Okay.
being petty.
That's interesting. I will say this about Toshiro is that you don't get a lot of the moral ambiguity with him that you get with a lot of
No.
characters in this story. I don't think there's any question that he's a good kid. And he is like a legitimately. I think what I find appealing about him is that I don't have to deal with that. I know he's a good person, and I think it's nice to have a couple characters in a story where we can say that. And on the human side, obviously, we've got a number of those, but not so much on the Soul Reaper side. But I also think he struggles with self doubt in kind of an appealing way, because he is so young to be in the role of responsibility that he is. And he, as I remember, he got like a one episode flashback arc in the middle of Arrancar somewhere, like a one chapter
Yeah,
flashback
yeah.
episode. I remember that. I thought that was interesting. Why one chapter? But so it's like it felt very out of place, frankly, although it was interesting. But yeah, I think that his self doubt. I think there's like a sort of there's like a mystery to him, and it's like we get little glimpses of his power, but you kind of wonder, why is he of all these captains, why is he in this role at such a young age? What is it about him that makes him so exceptional? And I feel like there's like an untapped something to his character, like we haven't seen everything that there is to see there yet. And
Mm.
maybe that there are people that find that to be interesting too. But I just thought it was interesting, yeah, that he would be the one who would be ranking like number one, number two in the character polls when he's not put in that many high glamour situations in the first couple of major arcs of the story. So
Yeah, yeah, I agree. In terms of rating the Fake Karakura Town arc, I'll jump in then.
okay, okay,
Basically, like I said, I think if you're a fan of Bleach, if you're bought into the characters, if you like Battle Shonen, it does all the things that you would want it to do. And because that describes me, I would give this section of the story a 95.
wow, okay.
Now,
It
let's hear your
probably
different take.
yeah, it won't shock you to hear that my score in here is going to be a little lower than it was for the first three sections.
Yeah,
I'm going to give it a 76, just because
yeah,
I was honestly checked out for a lot of it. And it's like if I could take out of the 111 or 102 or whatever, however many chapters this this semi-official arc is, if I could pick like my favorite 20 chapters from it, I would probably be much, much higher. Like at its best, I think it's maybe as good as anything in the whole series up to this point. But there's a lot of chapters that are not anywhere near that level. So I think that when I have to rank it based on every chapter, not just the ones I like. So I'm going to give it a 76. Yeah.
That's valid. Okay, in that case, let's jump over to recommendations to wrap up this discussion. I'll kick that off as well, because I'm going to go with the series and an arc we've discussed not too long ago. I'm going to say Rurouni Kenshin, specifically the Kyoto arc. I said this before, there's just so many striking structural similarities here that is quite funny. So both of them have a villain who takes revenge against the powers that be. He amasses this group of 10 villains. You have the Jupon Katana in Kenshin, which are translated as the 10-pointed swords, and then the Espada, who are the swords in Bleach. The villain, Aizen Shishio, they use them for their means, and there's also a fake-out location where they change where the final battle is going to be before a orange-haired swordsman comes in to fight the foe and finds sympathy in the villain in the final moments of their demise.
That's an interesting call. Yeah, I like it. I can totally see it. Okay, well, my recommendation is going to be the Soul Society arc of Bleach. No, I'm just kidding. My recommendation is Yu Yu Hakusho by a man whose name has come up during the course of this broadcast a few times. And not only this one, Togashi Yoshihiro. And we've talked about some ways in which this arc specifically does remind me or us of Hunter x Hunter, not least of which is the ending with Ichigo and losing his powers, which, for the record, I in no way am suggesting he was copying, or that either. I knew that they were broadly similar in the time they came out, and it never, no way was I intending to say, merely that there was kind of an overriding similarity in the two things. But I actually think Yu Yu Hakusho is more similar to this arc than Hunter x Hunter overall. I'm not as big a fan of Yu Yu Hakusho as I am of Hunter x Hunter, obviously, which is, my favorite battle shonen, well, the best battle shonen of all time. As I said, maybe Rurouni Kenshin would be a co-favorite, but I think Hunter x Hunter is the best. And there's a sort of Yu Yu Hakusho is not concerned with death as the main theme in the same way that Bleach is, but there is a sort of an overriding element of death and the afterlife, and I think I've always felt that YYH is kind of a deceptively bleak series in its outlook, maybe more so than a lot of casual fans realize. And I think that some of that bleakness, I think, crosses over between Yu Yu Hakusho and Arrancar. I think there is some of that same feeling of that I get from both of them. And Yu Yu Hakusho, there's something in the fights too. I mean, the action, Yu Yu Hakusho is not wall-to-wall action in the same way that a lot of Arrancar is, but when there is action, there's something kind of broadly similar to me in the way the fights themselves play out. They just feel very, very, very. They feel like soulmates to me. Obviously, artistically, Togashi works in a very, very different way than Kubo does, but I think the Togashi we got in Hunter x Hunter was a very different mangaka than the one we got in YYH. I think YYH is more within it plays more within the guardrails of more traditional battle shonen than Hunter x Hunter does, and I think it reminds me in some ways of it's much. Hunter x Hunter is a maximalist series, and Yu Yu Hakusho is more minimalist than Hunter x Hunter. I think it's not as minimalist as Bleach by any stretch of the imagination, but I do go sort of get that same vibe that what's happening is everything that happens is relevant, and you just sort of go, There's less atmospheric kind of a padding than there is in Hunter x Hunter, where sometimes the story is what happens along the way, whereas with YYH and Bleach, the story is the story. And so I don't know. That's all sounds kind of nebulous, but the two feel like first cousins in my mind.
I get that. I also recommended Yu Yu Hakusho to Bleach, his first arc as well. So I think there's definitely
Did you? I'd
some,
forgotten that. Yeah.
yeah, there's similarities in the DNA. So yeah, I totally get that recommendation. Okay, we've been talking about Arrancar for a long time, so let's wrap up with our
Yes.
final scores of the full arc. I've said everything I need to say, so I'll keep it pretty brief, just the average pretty much of everything that's come before it. But I think, yes, Kubo was able to explore what he enjoyed exploring in Soul Society and mirrored that and twisted it and got to showcase more of his character's traits that fans picked up on along the way. So yeah, I'm giving it a 95, which is lower than Soul Society, but I think considering how big this arc is, yeah, there are more dips in it for sure, but I still enjoy a lot about it.
Okay. Now I don't remember what I gave Soul Society, and that's God's honest truth. I didn't go back and check. I don't remember what score I gave it. If you ask me, without going back and checking my score, I feel like on the whole, I would rank Soul Society just a hair higher than Arrancar, maybe a point or two. That's what it feels like in my head. If you'd asked me before Fake Karakura Town, I would have said maybe equal, but I think the degree to which I kind of was in and out with that last section, it takes it a point or two lower. So I'm going to go 79 here, and I don't know what score I gave Soul Society. I feel like I might have given it an 80 or an 81. That in my head, this is 1 or 2 points lower than Soul Society.
Well, you're right then because you gave it 80, so that all checks out.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
I do think Soul Society is just a little better on the whole, I would say.
I agree. It's more concise and it's more efficient in the time spent to tell what it wants to tell. Well, with that, thank you everyone for listening for these 2 episodes, and thank you, Enzo, for this mammoth task of reading Arrancar and discussing it with me. I was worried that you were going to completely fall off the Bleach in the same way that some haters did at this point, but I'm glad to see that you have a kind of new, fresh perspective compared to people who experienced it as it came out. So yeah, it's been fun to talk about it.
Yeah, it is a fun series to talk about because it is quite different than the stuff I normally read. So, absolutely. And he's always got something interesting going on.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm looking forward to when we do discuss the next arc as well. That's even Bleach fans will, I think, be curious for your take on that because it's a contentious one. It's an interesting one. That's all I'll say.
Interesting. Okay.
For now, then, thank you everyone for listening, and yeah, stay tuned for more series reviews and other discussions that we're going to have throughout 2026. In that case, everyone, stay bleachy. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.